Okay, so what I'd like to discuss is inequality and specifically around gender and how it's been a problem for business and society. For this discussion, we were asked to create a constructive or opposing argument based around this topic, or actually this topic that I chose. So, gender inequality is a problem for business and society. Whether it's a growing problem, I personally think that it is something that is getting better over the course of the last few decades. Is it getting better fast enough? No, it's not. So we'll dive a little bit into that. In 2009, there were approximately 1.3 billion out of 3.2 billion workers in that were females, and so that accounted for about 40%. However, at that time, only about 52% of those females actually worked outside of the household, compared with 78% of males. Workplace environment has been something that has been predominantly dominated by males for hundreds, I guess you could even argue thousands of years. And so there's been types of stereotypes that have been associated with men versus women in the workplace and at home for that argument. Men were considered to be, masculine, warriors, more dominant, having characteristics of being aggressive, forceful, more logical, more self-reliant, different things like that, where women, on the other hand, were considered to be objects of sexual desire, wives, and housekeepers, housemakers. They were thought to display characteristics that should be associated more with kindness, being helpful, submissive, and more emotional. A lot of this culture in the workplace created things, sexual harassment, things that still exist today. We see that coming out in social media a lot more prevalent than we used to in the past. I think that's because of the fact that we are moving in the right direction. Females, I hope, feel more empowered to speak up, more empowered to come out, more empowered to point out these injustices. And I think that this is something that sexual harassment that people think of as being just the cases to where women are being sexually or physically harassed, or even comments or whatever. But I'd like to point out that there are several different types of sexual harassment within the workforce that women experience. Some of those discussed in our book were actually, I think it was an article that I read, but beside the point, such as an older man who would treat a female as his daughter. In that scenario, I don't think any of us really think of them trying to be malicious, or that being taken as any kind of in a sexual way. Is very subtle. I'm sure would hope that there were good intentions, but in those cases, at times that can be hurtful towards women because of the fact that it undermines them or diminishes their authority. I think that's something that women have to deal with. Of course, to the extreme level, there's the quid pro quo, where women are subjected to acts of sexual favors in order to keep a job, get a job, other things like this that are obvious, for obvious reasons, completely unacceptable. So I think that there's different levels of sexual harassment that women experience in the workplace. Another example that was given was women who are in um, an authoritative position where men may feel threatened by that and try to sexualize women in order to gain superiority or to even for their own sense of superiority or in an effort to reduce that female's authority. This is all, you know, something that has been that women have been fighting for, and hopefully men helping to change this culture as well. As you know, these are oftentimes our mothers, our daughters, wives, etc. So, in any way, shape, or form, whether subtle or extreme, completely unacceptable. Another thing that women have struggled with, gender inequality, is position of management. This is, I am personally in the healthcare field, so, and my boss is a female, somebody that I consider to be a mentor. Um, and so this may not have been quite as obvious to me because there are a lot of managers and supervisors and everything else, AVPs in my field that are managers. But upon research, I have found that uh, that this is somewhere that women are actually excelling, and that 70% of managers in the healthcare setting are females. But if you look at it at a much larger scale, then females only account for 37% of managers. So that is definitely a place that we need to improve. Um, Again, I do believe that we are making strides in that direction, which is the only reason that I'm coming at this and uh, saying that it's not necessarily a growing matter, that it's something that seems to be being corrected over time. At least I hope that's the case, but it is still an issue. So if you look at that, only about 2.6% of CEOs are females, which is a very small amount. It seems that once you get to that manager position, as you continue to increase from manager to director, the AVP to presidents to CEUs, the percentage of the 37% managers, that number continues to decline until you get to 2.6% of CEUs actually being females. There are some arguments that say that there's an interruption in a lot of females' careers around the 30-year mark-ish, that average in about 1.2 years of interruption in their career path due to home life and having children and things like that. But there's also a lot of evidence that says that once females hit a certain level, that there seems to be some type of glass ceiling that is hard to get past. There's also arguments that maybe glass ceiling isn't the correct terminology, but definitely some type of labyrinth that presents a lot of obstacles and difficult paths and everything um, in the way of women trying to reach those career goals in comparison to men. Looking at other things, there's also pay inequalities. So for women, if you look at the time the Equal Pay Act was put into place in 1963 to try and prohibit differentials between the pay of men and women. Women were making probably about 57 cents on the dollar compared to that of men. Since 63 to 2010, that has increased to 81.4 cents compared to the dollar of men. which you could argue is a good improvement, but it is still not equal. And so, although that's another reason that I am saying that it's not a growing issue, it is still an issue. And so, another thing that we need to correct. There's actually arguments that state that this number and this closing of that gap is actually smaller than what is shown in studies, and the reason for that being due to the fact that in general, women, there are more graduating collegiate women than there are males. From 1970 to 2010, rate of bachelors of men grew from 20 to 27%. Of course, women grew from 14% to 36%, which is a significant increase in the education and degrees of women, which again is a stride in the correct direction. But if you look at the pay wages of women compared to men and factor in the fact that a lot of these women that have these higher paying jobs are getting them through education, and that if men had that same education, then that gap would not be quite as large. That's an argument that also could be made towards that. So, in general, I think that we are, as a society and as a business, moving in the right direction. I think that there's a lot of change coming that is through organizations that is looking towards lower pay wages, lower benefits, not as good of retirement benefits, different things like this, outsourcing, and other things in efforts to reduce pay costs, that a lot of these inequalities will continue because they want to pay less money to certain people, and it seems like they feel that they can get away with this. Unfortunately, there are groups out there such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that that are put into place to try and fight these type of things, but it seems that they are tied up dealing with specific issues and specific inequalities, and don't have enough support or enough power through groups to fight these different inequalities and to make these push and these closure of these gaps and everything, and get them to where they should be fast enough. There's a lot of arguments that we may never reach the place where we should be, but it's my thoughts that we're slowly and not as quickly as we should be moving in the right direction, and hopefully as more people become educated and learn of these things, and the more it comes out in society and everything else, that the more obvious it'll be, and the more people that will have to try and move this in the right direction. So thank you. That concludes my my argument towards this, and have a good day.